Hey there, welcome back. In case we haven't met yet, my name is B and I love to code the heck out of Squarespace and teach other designers how to do it too. Today is day 9 of the 12 days of Christmas, a video series where I'm sharing with you one new customization tutorial for Squarespace every single day until December 12th. Today we're going to be covering a really cool customization. We're going to be building a business information bar at the top of the header in 7.1. Now, this customization is going to require us to write a little bit of HTML, but I promise you that is very simple to create, and we're going to be able to style it however we want with CSS. So if you're interested in learning how to create this for your client sites, keep on watching. Alrighty, so here is a little demo of what we're going to be achieving today. Here you can see that I have a 7.1 site, and then up here we have the business information bar that we're going to be building. So you can see on this side I have the hours of the business, and then in the middle I have the email, and then on this side I have a phone number. Now, if we take a look at what this looks like on mobile, you can see that as I shrink down my screen, everything is very responsive, and then there is a breakpoint where everything aligns here on the right side, but you can decide whether you want to align that to the center or to the left side as well. And then once we hit mobile, we have the same layout in here, so everything is stacked and everything is perfectly readable at all times. So the setup for the bar is actually fairly simple. So let's just go ahead and dive right into our website to be able to make it happen. Here I have the 7.1 site that I'm going to be working with. And then on this side, we're going to be working inside the code injection section first to be able to build that HTML to create the bar. Now up here I already have a little bit of information, but these are basically just the links of the different icons that I'm going to be using just to have them on hand so I don't have to hop back into the custom CSS window to look for those links. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the structure. So the way that I want to build this bar is that I want to have 3 sections that are going to be wrapped within one single container. And then that container is also going to be sitting inside another one. And you'll know why in just a few minutes. So let's just go ahead and build this out, and I'm going to be walking you through everything that I'm going to be creating here. So I'm going to start out with a div. And then I'm going to be naming everything here just so that it's easier for us to target things via CSS. So I'm going to give this a class of business bar wrapper. And then within this div, I'm going to be creating a second div. So this one is going to have a class of simply business bar. And of course you can name this anything you want. I'm just using like an obvious name here. Okay, so now that I have my 2 sort of bigger containers, I'm going to go ahead and build the 3 sides. So I'm going to have one container for the left side, one container for the middle, and another container for the right side. The reason why I want to build it this way is because it's going to be a lot easier to be able to decide where things are going to go. Whether we want to have everything aligned to the left side, to the right side, to the center, or separated the way that I showed you in the demo. So let's go ahead and create those divs here. So I'm going to give these a class as well. So for the first one, this is going to be business bar left. And then as a sibling of this, so I'm not going to put it inside it because let me just close this here. I don't want to put anything inside here right now. I'm just creating sort of like the siblings of this one. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and then I'm going to build the one that's going to go in the center. And then I'm going to build the one that is going to go on the right side. All right, awesome. So right now, again, we have sort of like the bigger container, and then within this one, we have another container. And this is the one that is holding our 3 sides or our 3 sections of the bar. So we have the left side, the center, and the right side. Now let's go ahead and start with the left side. So I'm going to open this up. And now inside here, I'm going to go ahead and add the icon and the text that is going to go with the hours. Now, of course, if you want to add a different information here, you can absolutely do that. I'm just using these as an example. So I'm going to be creating here a P element. I don't really need this to be clickable or anything because it's just going to showcase information. So I'm going to be using a P element. And then in here, I'm going to break this into 2. I'm going to have an image element holding the icon, and then I'm going to have a span holding the text. So let's go ahead and start with the image. So here, I'm just going to call this one, I'm going to call this one just clock icon. So I'm going to do the business hours here first. So let's close that up, and then I'm gonna add the source right away. So my clock icon is this link that I have here. So I'm just gonna grab that, place it here. All right, and that is my image. And then, like I said, inside the P element, I'm having both the image and the span, which is going to hold the text. So let's do here span. And then in here, we can just have this say anything we want. So I'm going to type in here, let's say 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. All right, perfect. So here I have the business hours. Now let's go ahead and move on to the second container, so to the center one. So in this one, I'm going to go ahead and add the email. So I'm going to do the same thing here, but instead of building a P element, I'm going to build here an A element because I want this to be clickable. So I'm going to add an A element. We're going to add in the link in just a second. I'm just going to build the structure first. So we have the A element. I'm doing the same thing as before. Instead of a P, I'm just using an A. And so within those A tags, because I want everything to be clickable, I'm going to add my icon. So image, let's just add the source first, which is going to be this email icon. All right, and let's just add a little bit of an alt text here. So email icon, there we go. And then we're going to add our span element. And then this one is just going to say email@email.com. All right, perfect. So we have our second section of the bar there. Now let's move on to the third one. So I'm doing the same thing once again, and I'm going to go back to the A element in just a second. So here, let's go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to build this as an A element as well because I want the phone number to be clickable too, just in case somebody is looking at that on their phone and they can call right away. So I'm going to add an A element here. And I'm going to add the icon, so source. Let's just grab the phone. There, an alt tag, phone icon, close it, and then we have our span, which is just going to be a number, so 819. And then we can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, perfect. So we have that there. And now I'm going to go back into the A elements and add their links. So for the email, what we're going to do here is we're going to type in our href attribute. And to be able to have this immediately click to send an email through the email app that anybody can have on a phone or the computer, let's just go ahead and use here mail to : and then we're going to add the email we want to make clickable. Now, as for the phone number, we're going to do the same thing, but the little sort of prefix for the value is a little bit different. So I'm going to go into the A element of the phone number, and then here I'm going to type in the href attribute, and instead of using mail to, here we're going to be using tel, and then here we just add in our phone number. So 819, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and that's pretty much it for our HTML structure. So here we have the bigger container that is holding the whole business bar, and then we have sort of like another inner container for the business bar that is holding the 3 sections. So we have the business bar left, business bar center, and business bar right. And then within each of those sections, we have a different type of information. So here we have a P element that is holding the icon and the span for the business hours. And then inside the center one, we have an A element that is holding the icon and the text for the email. And then for the third section, we have the telephone number inside an A element, and then we have the image and the text for that actual number. And with all of this information in place, we can go ahead and save this. And once we do, you're gonna see how we have all of our new elements all the way up here looking very weird, but we're gonna fix that with CSS in just a minute. So before we jump into the custom CSS window, let's just go ahead and take a look at what this structure looks like inside the inspect element tool. So if we take a look in here, we're going to see that all the way up here, so right inside the body tag, so all the way up here, we have our div called business bar wrapper. So that is this one that we have created in here. And then if we open this one up, we can see how we have business bar in here. So that is this container. And then if we open this one up, we can see how we have our 3 sections. We have left, center, and right. So the way that we created them here. And then if we open each of these up, we can see the rest of the content. So in the first one, we have our P element that holds an image element and a span. Then inside the second one, we have an A element that if we open this up, we have our icon and we have a span element. And then inside the third one, the same thing, we have an A element, and then within it, we have an icon and the span for the number. So knowing that we have everything set up correctly here, let's go ahead and start styling. So I'm going to go inside the custom CSS window. And then here, the first thing that I want to do is I want to give a little bit of color to this bar. So the way that I'm going to do that is by targeting that sort of main container that I built for it. So I'm going to go all the way up here and I'm going to target that business bar wrapper. So again, sort of like the main container of this whole business bar. So I'm going to grab that class and I'm going to be using it in here. And let's just go ahead and give this kind of like a greenish color. So I'm going to add in here background color. I'm going to paste in this hex code that I already had in here, which has like this dark green, which also helps us see the little white icons that we had in here. All right, so the next thing that I want to do here is I want to set this up horizontally. So let's go ahead and do that. The way that I'm going to do this is via Flexbox. So I want to be able to have everything in a single row, and then with Flexbox we're going to be able to have the ability of deciding how things are going to be sort of split apart if we want to have them apart. So let's go ahead and set up Flexbox. In order to do that, what we need to do is basically target the parent container, the direct parent container that is holding the things that we want to organize. So what we want to organize is these three elements that we have in here, these three siblings. That means that we need to apply Flexbox to this container that is directly holding these three elements. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the class of business bar, and I'm going to set this to display flex. Now, by default, what's going to happen is that all three things or anything that we have directly within that container is going to sit automatically in a row. So that already helps us save a step because we don't really need to indicate that we want things to be in a single row. They already do that naturally. Now, let's go ahead and align things a little bit because right now they're looking a little bit off. So the first thing that I want to do here is set this to align items center. And like that, you can see how everything has sort of dropped a little bit. So if I were to remove this, you can see how those last two things are not really aligned to the center, but if I do it this way, then they are, so that's great. Now let's go ahead and leave the alignment of these elements, so the distribution of these sections within the bar. We're going to leave that for later because first I want to organize this a little bit. It's not really looking that great right now, so let's go ahead and tackle that. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of the font. So I'm going to go ahead and do that directly in here. We don't really need to do it directly within the actual elements themselves, so the P element and the A element, because we're building this from scratch. So there's nothing really there that already has a style for the color and stuff. So apart from like the general ones. But anyway, let's go ahead and go in here and set the color of the font to white. All right, that's looking already much better. And then I think I definitely need to shrink down the icons because they're huge. So the way that I'm gonna do this to target all of them at once is I'm going to target here business bar image because those are the only three images that I have in there, and the business bar is the only thing that I have in here that's called business bar. So let's go ahead and do it this way, target them this way, and then I'm going to go ahead and give them maybe like a max width of about like 20 pixels. All right, and then I want to separate them a little bit from the text here. So let's do a margin to the right of about like 10 pixels. All right, that looks pretty good. And then the next thing that I want to do, we're not really going to split them apart for the time being because we're going to separate them a different way. So let's just go ahead and make sure that these things are aligned because right now they're not. So let's go ahead and use a vertical align here. And the reason why I can use vertical align in this situation is because we're dealing with an image element and a span element, and both of them by default are inline elements, which means that we can apply vertical align to them. So let's go ahead and set this to the middle, and you can see how right now we have the phone number like aligned horizontally with the little icon, and then the same thing here for the email and the same thing for the business hour. So that's just a quick tip that I have there for you. So if you're dealing with inline elements or inline block elements, you can use vertical align middle to be able to center them without having to use Flexbox. Okay, so now that this is looking a little bit better, let's go ahead and distribute them. So the way that we can do that, and the reason why I'm using Flexbox here, is because now we can go ahead and use the justify content property to be able to decide how things are going to be aligned within the business bar. So here, right now, justify content. Right now, what's happening is that by default, the value for this property is flex start. So flex start is just aligning things to the left side. If I wanted to align all of these things to the right side, I would use flex end, and you can see how everything just moves to the right side of the business bar. And then if I wanted everything in the center, I could go ahead and change this for center, and we have everything in the center. So you can see that by changing just one value here, we can immediately have everything aligned where we want it to. And of course, if you wanted to have these elements in here, then you would definitely need to add a little bit of margin to them to be able to separate them. But because it's not the case, that's not what I want to do right now. What I want to do is have one element here, or one section to the left side, the other one to the middle, and the other one to the right side. Then what I'm going to do is use a different value for justify content. I'm going to be using here space between. And what space between is going to do is literally that. It's going to add some space in between each of the sections, effectively creating the layout that we want. Now let's go ahead and work on the padding, because right now you can see how this is way too close to the edge of the business bar, and here the same thing is happening. So let's go ahead and add a little bit of padding. And I'm going to go ahead and use here padding. Let's do a little bit to the top and to the bottom as well. So I'm gonna do maybe like 10 pixels for top and bottom. And then we can do, here what I would recommend actually is using the same value that you have for the padding of the site so that you can match it to the header. I'm gonna show you what I mean in just a second. So here I'm going to be using for viewport width for the time being. You can see how now we have a nice space here on this side and on this side. And the reason why I'm using for viewport width, let me show you here, is because here inside the spacing section of the site styles, I have the site margin set as for viewport width. So this is the same value that I would recommend using in here. Because if you were to use your site header, if you had your site header here set as full, that padding is going to be that distance that you have applied to this header, or that Squarespace applies to the header. So once we save the changes here, what's going to happen is that the margin that the header has and the padding that you have applied to the business bar is going to match. So you're going to have everything aligned at all times. So if you want that to be a thing on your client's website, then make sure to use the same number that you have for the site margin as the site padding for the business bar. If you don't want to do that, then you can use any other number, but that's how I want to have this in here. Now I'm going to turn this back into inset. I'm going to show you how to align it to inset a little bit later, but I'm going to leave this the way that it was, and let's save this. Now another trick that I want to do here is I want to make sure that that center section that I have in here is actually in the center, because right now is not quite in the center. So in order to do this, because we're working with Flexbox, the easiest way to make that happen is to have these two sections a specific width, and then allow the middle section to just be there and not really set a width for it. So I'm going to go ahead and target this section and this section. I'm going to use their classes of business bar left and business bar right. There we go. And I'm going to give them a width of 30%. And once I do that, you're going to see two things happening. So the first one, let me just disable this for a second. You can see how the email here is not quite in the center, but then once I set everything to a width of 30%, or these two sides to 30%, then this just automatically gets centered in here. So that's what we're going for. And like I said, you can pretty much use any number that you want. Of course, depending on a number, if you make it too big, you're going to squish the thing in the middle. So I would suggest not using a very large number here, but it doesn't really matter what you use. So let's say we wanted to make this only like 10%, then this is still gonna work. If we wanted to make this only like 5%, then what's gonna happen is that these two things are going to squish down, but this one is going to stay in the middle. So this is a really cool trick that you can use when you're applying Flexbox to something like this. I'm going to go ahead and turn this back to 30. And then what I want to do is fix what happened here. So basically the problem, let's just take a quick look here. Basically the problem here is that that container is now a little bit big, and so the content inside it is automatically aligned to the left side. So if we go back into our business bar, you can see how we have here the left side. Look how big it is here. Then we have the center, which we didn't really modify the width for this, so it's just sitting there like chilling in the center based on the width of its content. And then on the right side, we have the same width as the one that we have on the left side. Now, again, the problem with the right side is that things like, because the container is too big, the thing inside it just aligned by default to the left side. I don't really want to have it here. I want to have this to the right side so that it's aligned with the edge all the way here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to target the business bar right, and I'm going to align the content within it to the right side. And once I do that, we have everything looking awesome in our business bar. And now let's go ahead and take care of this overlap that is happening here because it doesn't look great. So the way that we can handle this is by basically pushing down a little bit the header so that it makes enough room for the business bar that we created in here. So the way that we're going to do this is by targeting the whole header container. So let's look for that in here. If we scroll all the way up, we can see that this is the whole header element. So all of this code that we have in here is the header, and then we have like the content area of the page, and then we have the footer. So what we want is to push this header container a little bit down. So I'm just going to go ahead and target it with the ID of header to be able to target only this element across the entire site. And I'm just going to apply a margin at the top of whatever height it is that our business bar has. So to know how tall your business bar is, what you can do is just go in here inside your inspect element tool and then stand over it. So if you stand over it, you're going to see this little bubble popping up. So that one just gives you the dimensions of the element. So in this case, this one is 2133 wide by 68 tall. So what we want is that 68 pixels, or whichever value it is that you have for your business bar, and that is how much margin we're going to add to the header so that we can make the exact room it needs to be able to fit in there. So let's go ahead and set this up in here. Like I said, I'm going to target the header through the header ID, and then I'm just going to apply a margin at the top of 68 pixels. And once I do that, you can see how this sort of squishes down a little bit, and now we have enough room for our business bar. Now let's go ahead and save this and take a look at mobile. So I'm going to open this up for a second, and then if I start shrinking it down, let me remove this from here. If we start shrinking things down, you can see how everything is responsive. Like I said, because I'm using the same value that we have for the site margin, then everything just looks aligned at all times here, which is great. Not here on desktop at the moment because this is set to inset, which we'll get to in a second. But right now, everything looks pretty good here. Once everything matches in width, it looks great. And then once we hit here the mobile breakpoint, we still have everything looking pretty good. But the problem is that at some point, and it really depends on how much information you have in there, at some point things are going to just not look that good together. So what I want to do is, before this happens, I want to create a breakpoint where I decide how things are going to look like. So you could do a couple of things in here. One of the things you could do is basically get rid of the text that you have within each of those elements and just leave the icons there. That would be a really cool option if you have clickable things in here. Now, because I don't have the business hours as a clickable thing, that doesn't really make sense to get rid of the text and just leave the icons, because if you see the clock, you're not really going to see the times. So that's not the option that I'm going to go with here. You can definitely use that if you want to, but what I want to do is just simply stack the things so that we can keep all of the information available and readable, but in a different layout. So let's go ahead and open this up, and we're going to set things in our code. I'm going to shrink this down so that we can have the mobile view in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a media query. Now, I want this to apply to tablets as well. I don't really care about where things squish down because I know that it's very late. Like it's for very small devices that this sort of misalignment starts happening. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a random breakpoint. So I'm going to be using here media screen and max width 960 pixels because that is the point where I want things to stack. Okay, so since we're working with Flexbox, what we can do here to be able to stack things is to simply target our parent container here, so the business bar. We're going to target this, and now instead of leaving that direction, like the automatic direction of row, what we're going to do is change that for column. So the way we can do that is by using the flex property called flex direction, which, like I said, by default this is set to row. We're not really seeing it in here in the code. It's just something that the browser does automatically. So what we're doing is we're changing that row direction for something else. And in my case, I just want to set this to column. So you can see that even in the mess that we have here at the moment, everything is now stacked on top of each other instead of sitting next to each other. Now, to be able to fix this like craziness that is going on in here, what we need to do is make sure that all of these sections, so the sections that are holding the icon and the text, that all of them are set to 100% of the space so that they can stretch out. Right now, you can see that if I click on this one, here you can see how the width of this is 30%. So this is the 30% that is coming from the previous snippet that we created in here. We have that this one is set to 30%. This one is just basically sticking to the width of the content within it. So it's not really being bigger than that. And then here we have the right side, which we also set to a width of 30%. So what I want, and especially to be able to align these things to either the left side, the center, or the right side, I want to make sure that these three containers occupy as much space as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and target all three and set the width to 100%. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to copy this snippet here and I'm going to complete it. So I'm going to do that inside the media query. And I'm going to copy that. And then this one is going to be center. So now I'm going to target all three containers, so left, center, and right. And I'm going to give all of them a width, of 100%. Awesome. And now we get to decide where we want to align these things. So do we want to have all the text to the right side, all the text to the center, or all the text to the left side? And the way that we can do that is to basically set here text align. So again, I'm targeting all three because I want to have the same alignment for all of them. So text align, here we could decide to have everything aligned to the right side or to the center or to the left side. So I'm going to leave this to the right side because that's the look that I'm going for. And you can see here that these, like the spacing between these things is actually a little bit different at the moment. So let's go ahead and take a quick look and see what is going on there. So if we open up our business bar left section, you can see how the P element has some margin to the top and to the bottom. And then if we open up the other two sections, the A element within these sections don't really have that margin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove it from the P element, and then we can set our own margin for these first two sections so that we can create the space that we want. So let's go ahead and start by removing this business bar left. And I'm actually going to do this for all devices. I don't want to do this just inside the media query when things are stacked. I want to apply this at all times. So I'm going to add this code outside of the media query. So I'm going to add it up here. Let's add the little period here. And then I'm going to target that P element within that business bar left section. And I'm going to set the margin to 0. So once I do that, you can see how everything shrunk down a little bit, and now the spacing in between these three things is the same. Of course, now they look a little bit too close together, so let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of margin to the bottom of the left section and of the center section. And I'm going to do that inside the media query because I only want this to apply when things are stacked, which is at my 960 pixel breakpoint. So let's go ahead and do that. Business bar left and center. I'm going to target those two sections only because we don't really need to add a margin at the bottom of the last section, just between these two. And let's go ahead and do margin bottom. Let's do something like 10 pixels. All right, awesome. And now the last thing that we need to do here on mobile is to basically fix that position for the header, because right now you can see how, what did we use before, 68. So 68 isn't really enough for this mobile header to sit where it needs to be to make enough room for the business bar. So let's just go ahead and take a quick look at the new height that this bar is going to have on mobile to see how many pixels we need to make that margin. So if I stand over it, you can see how this is around 100. So let's just go ahead and use 100 pixels to be able to create that margin at the top. So I'm going to do that again inside the media query because this is where the change in the height of the business bar is happening. So let's go ahead and retarget our header container. And now the margin at the top is going to be 100 pixels instead of 68. And once we do that, you can see how now we have enough room for this and we have the header sitting right beneath it. All right, so let's go ahead and save this and check out desktop for a second. All right, so here we need to make a slight modification to either the padding of the section or of the business bar or to the margin at the top of the header. Because the problem is that because we reduced that margin for the P element, that reduced the height of the whole section. So I think we can increase the padding of this business bar a little bit, like at the top and at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead back here where I added the background color and the padding to the top, the bottom, and the sides. And I'm going to change the padding at the bottom and at the top. So I think I'm going to make this 20 pixels. All right, that looks pretty good. And then let's just go ahead and check out the height to see how much we need to adjust that margin at the top. Okay, so if I stand over it, you can see how now the height of the business bar is 60 pixels, at least for desktop. So let's just go ahead and modify the margin at the top down here. We had it at 68. Let's change that to 60. All right, and we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and take another look here. So we have our lovely desktop business bar, and then once we start shrinking things down, we hit that breakpoint. We have the stacking happening, so it looks a little bit odd at this point. Let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so the height of this is 120, of course, because we just modified the padding. Just notice that. So let's go ahead and make that really quick change here. So instead of having this margin at the top, this is inside mobile. So instead of having the margin at the top at 100, like we did before, now we need to have 120. So let's open this up once more, shrink things down. All right, perfect. Now we have everything aligned here. And then if we keep shrinking things down, you can see how everything still looks good. We have our information here all nicely stacked and everything is looking great. Now, before we wrap this up, I just want to show you one last thing. I want to show you what you can do if you want to have your business bar aligned to your inset header. So if you're working with an inset header here in 7.1, what you can do is include one more thing inside your code, actually 2 lines. But let me show you what you need to include in here. If we take a quick look inside the header, so the inset header that we're working with here, you're going to see that within one of these containers, so this one that's called header inner, you can see how this one has margin to the sides. So this margin here is actually coming from the difference between the max width that the header is supposed to have versus the rest of the space that is available within like the browser window. And that max width value is what we need to use inside our own business bar to be able to create the same width restriction. So in this case, the max width here is 1440 pixels. And that number is actually coming from that same spacing panel from before. So if we take a look here inside styles, and then I click here on spacing, you're going to see that my page width is set to 1440 pixels. So that is sort of the width limit that the header, the inset header, is respecting. And so if we use that same max width inside our business bar, we're going to be able to shrink things down and we're going to have everything match the same width as the header. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to save this. And then up here, and this is the reason why I have 2 things in here, why I have 2 sort of main containers. Because the problem is that if I wanted to align just this one, so imagine that we were just using one of these. The problem is that if I were to apply the max width to the same one that carries the background color, if I do it this way, max width, 1440 pixels, oops, that's not 1440, there we go. If I do it this way, the background color is also going to shrink down with the content. And that's not what I want to happen. I want the background color to cover the whole width of the browser window, but I want the content to be narrow. So that's why I need to have two containers here instead of just one, because I need one of them to be the full width of the browser, and then I need the one inside it, which in this case is business bar, to have that restricted width for the content. So now if I apply the max width in here, you can see how the content gets restricted, but the background color still expands 100% of the website. So now the last thing that we need to do is basically align this to the center, because right now by default it's just aligned to the left side. So let's go ahead, and I'm talking about the whole container, not the text within it. So let's just go ahead and add in here margin 0 auto, and that is just going to make sure that the whole content container, we have it in the middle of the business bar. And now if we save this and we take another look, we can see how everything matches because we're using the same max width that we have inside the spacing panel, and we're using the same padding that we have in that spacing panel. We have everything here looking nice in this stacked layout, and everything is just consistently responsive across all devices. All right, and there you have it. That's how you can create a really cool business information bar for your client sites. If you like this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on the rest of the days of this 12 Days of Christmas series, and I will see you tomorrow.